Hello, everyone. Hi. It's the afternoon. We need a little bit of energy. Hello. I have lost my voice a bit talking to everyone over the past couple of days because I have been so excited to be back in an in-person conference. I don't normally sound like this, but I have been talking nonstop. Today, we're going to talk about paths that one can take in life. Oftentimes, there's the more well-trodden path and the one that's a bit less trodden, the one maybe less people go down. And I think when we talk about second career developers, especially later in life, what we're talking about is that path. And that's a path that I know a bit from my own personal experience. I started off life, I worked as a member of the clergy, as a rabbi for nearly a decade. And then about 5 years ago, I switched and became a developer. And I enrolled in a boot camp called Flatiron School and have worked in a couple of jobs. It's Flatiron School, woo! And have loved it. So this path, I though believe, is becoming increasingly conventional. The unconventional, this idea that you are this second career transitioner, who are those people? We don't know who those people are. There's more and more and more of us nowadays. And we come from all kinds of backgrounds, from teaching, from journalism, from sports, from the clergy, from the nonprofit sector, from bartending, from retail, from every sector imaginable. People are coming into this field. And they're doing it for a variety of reasons. I know what things I love about being a developer is the culture of nonstop learning. Always pushing yourself to learn new frameworks, learn new ways of doing things, learn new languages. The idea you're part of that community that's constantly striving and pushing themselves forward. I love that on the good days, I feel like I've contributed to something in a concrete way, in a concrete fashion. I've helped build something. And that feels very much like an accomplishment, and it feels great. And in fact, this whole phenomenon is not a minor one. We are in this period of time right now that is often called the Great Resignation. And by the Great Resignation, what I mean is that people in this age bracket, older millennials, geriatric millennials, I don't know what you want to call us, the folks who are with mortgages and some of us with kids and all those sort of things, we are leaving our jobs in huge numbers. And the pandemic has in many ways spurred that on and has accelerated that process. The numbers are incredible. In fact, something like 66% of Americans, and this is Americans, but one can extrapolate to other parts of the world as well, are keen to switch their jobs. And we want to switch jobs for all kinds of reasons. Maybe the things we just talked about. We want to switch to a job where we love the learning. We love the community, the professional community around it. We may love the culture around the new career we're going into. But there's also a very concrete reason why many of us switch into software. And that's because software developers earn a lot of money. I guess so. In 2018, the US Bureau of Labor and Statistics published this data that the average American salary is around $31,000 a year. The average software developer salary, $93,000 a year. That's an enormous disparity, and we could have an entire talk about the economic disparities. That's not our conversation today. That's another conversation. We're going to bracket that. But all that is to say is that there is a huge incentive. That kind of differential in earning power can be life transforming, can be generationally transforming for people. It can change your family in innumerable, uncountable, unfathomable ways. And so there's a huge incentive beyond the learning, beyond the culture, just the interest of taking care of yourself and the people you love and care about to come into this field. But doing so can often feel very challenging. I know I felt like that yellow the thing over there, that yellow peg. You look all around and everyone seems to be integrating so smoothly. Oh yeah, I did CS at Johns Hopkins, and oh yeah, I did CS at, I went to MIT, and it was awesome, and it was so cool. And you were like, well, I was a rabbi. Now I'm trying to get that developer job, and you're like, how do I get in there? It's so challenging. And that's what we're here today to talk about. The challenges, but also methods and possible approaches to address how to make that onboarding, both from the perspective of the person themselves and also the hiring managers who are hiring folks like us, how to make it smoother, how to make that less friction in the experience. Because unless we actually talk about it, unless we voice and raise concern, then it's not going to get better. We can kvetch to ourselves, right? We can argue to ourselves, we can complain silently. But if we don't raise it as a community and try and make it better, nothing's gonna get moved. So we have to talk about these things. And we're gonna do it on those two spectrums, those two parts of the pole. One is the IC, which stands for the individual contributor, which is many of us, those of us who are the employees, so to speak, who are working, doing the daily tasks, who are reporting to managers, who are being hired by hiring managers. And then the other one we're going to talk about is the manager themselves and the power that they yield. And with great power comes great responsibility. So when you're switching your career and you're coming into this field and having already had a profession, it can feel really odd in many ways. First of all, we would be remiss if we didn't mention the privilege that often is needed to do this, because you're going to be taking a pay cut for a while, right? For many of us, if you come from professional backgrounds, and you're going to have to struggle with how to manage that, both in the downtime when you're learning and you're getting ready to apply for a job, and then even when you land that first job, that pay cut could be very significant. So there is a privilege that comes with switching jobs, right? And then there's the idea that you may have spent years in another field, and you may have risen up that hierarchical ladder in that field, and now you're on the bottom again. You're on that lower rung. It's like, what do I do about that? Now I'm not experienced anymore, and everyone around you knows more than you do in this specific domain. And then that comes to bite you in the fact that when you apply for jobs, you're oftentimes seen as overqualified. Your CV gets put in the bin right away because they're like, this person, wow, this person's worked for years. They're not going to be a junior developer. I'm not going to hire this person. You're like, please hire me. I just need that job, but you're overqualified. At the same time, you're also underqualified because you are really qualified in working. You're a good worker, but at the same time, you're just learning the ropes of software development. And so you're in this, I would say, a liminal position between the things. And anytime you are between the things, that is challenging. And it can really feel like this in so many ways. That's me, by the way, in a few years. I use a filter. That's me in a few years. And that very much feels and resonates personally for my first management meetings with some of my first people I reported to when I started working as a software developer. The first thing I want to say about all of that, and I think this needs to be said, even though it can feel like it's obvious, the things that feel obvious are often not obvious, which is your experience counts. What you did in your life before matters. You have what to bring to the table. It really does. And your resume, your CV, it's not a liability. It really is not. It can feel like it is, but it's not. So how do you turn what can feel like it's a liability into something that actually can be a power boost for you in the application process? So what I think you need to do, and what I learned to do from the mentors I had in my coding school and what they taught, was that what you did matters more than what you were called when you were doing that thing. So let's actually take a minute to dive into that. So for example, let's say you were called a high school English teacher, or you were called a bartender, or maybe, I don't know who, but maybe you were called a member of the clergy, maybe some random person here. You have these titles, and these titles carry a lot of stereotypes, images, carry a lot with those words, right? And those words could have benefited you, right? But what you did in those jobs very much applies to working in software. For example, if you were a high school English teacher, you might have created individualized measurable sprints for 30 students every quarter, right? If you were a bartender, you managed ongoing client relationships. You iterated on your product with your clients in real time and got feedback. If you were a member of the clergy, you managed a diverse team of paid and volunteer staff. And there's no better experience than managing volunteers. I can tell you that firsthand. So think about the skills that you did. Think about the bullet points. And it's about emphasizing those bullet points, raising those bullet points up, and de-emphasizing the titles. Titles matter, they're there, but it's what you did more than what you were called. At the same time, it is imperative to learn to embrace the humility of being a second career developer. You know, there's a lot that we just don't know, and you learn it on the job. There's a lot that you're just coming into it. And if you are older, it can be hard to do that. Let's just talk honestly. It can be hard to do that because you've built up a professional background, you have developed expertise in other areas, you're used to knowing things. That's not everyone, and that is a generalization, but that certainly was me, right? So learning to embrace that humility, but also at the same time remembering that humility is not a doormat. There is a difference between being meek versus being humble. Humility is knowing and having the courage and the wisdom to know what you don't know. Meekness is even when you know what you know, you're afraid or you're hesitant or you're reticent to even express it. Humility is acknowledging your limits. So recognize you have what to bring to the table, but at the same time, recognize you have a lot you don't know, but what you have to bring to the table is powerful, and you don't have to be walked all over because you are just new to the field. You have a lot to bring. I often think of this quote from the 19th century from an ethicist who advised his students in his ethical tradition to always keep 2 pieces of paper in their pockets at all times that you could grasp with your hands. On one pocket, you would have a piece of paper that said, "I am just a speck of dust. I'm nothing." And the other, you would have a piece of paper that said, "The world was created for me." Wow. So you would have these tensions that you are just a person, you're just one of billions, but on the other hand, you would have literally in the other hand, hold into tension with that you matter infinitely, that you are worth indescribable amounts. So keeping those 2 things in tension, I believe, in your own life, it is working for me, and I believe it's something that we could try. And I'd be curious if you tried it, how it would work for you. What you write on your physical or metaphorical piece of paper, that's up to you. But how you hold those things in tension, that you have a lot to give, and you also have a lot to learn at the same time. So in short, don't undersell yourself. You really, really matter. Now, the other thing that comes up a lot when talking about what to do in this area and how to advance yourself is, what do you learn? In fact, every conversation I remember having, every conversation I have now in this topic, people are just inundated with the question of what to learn. This field has so many areas to start. Do you look at JavaScript? What about Python? What about Ruby? Yeah, Ruby. Node.js. There's this thing called Rust. It seems pretty cool, and people are doing it. Should I focus on Rust? And there's this other thing that's kind of like Ruby, but not, called Elixir. It's like a potion. It's kind of fun. But TypeScript, that's like JavaScript, but typed, and maybe I should do that instead. And titles, maybe I should become a front-end developer or a back-end developer or a full-stack developer. Where do I focus my energies? Because your energies are limited. So where do you focus those energies? And that conversation that happens mainly in your own head can be debilitating. and it can be disempowering for how you proceed and move forward. So what I want to offer, in contrast to that whole smorgasbord of things to learn, is that applying concepts matters more than learning a specific language or feeling like you have to have mastery over a specific language. So what do I mean by that? When I was in seminary, one of my teachers would often say, okay, we're studying this 2,000-year-old text in Aramaic, and we're using all this jargon and all these specific words. But if I stopped you on the street on 86 in Amsterdam, and I said to you, and I didn't know anything, I said to you, explain to me this thing in standing on one foot. Could you do it to me? Could you do it? Could you take the jargon? Could you take the nuances and the specific domain language and translate into something that is readily understood by anyone around you? So if you can look at this piece of Ruby code and you can understand what's happening there, that you see a class and has an initialize method, and it takes an attribute of a name, an attribute of an age, and the next thing you're instantiating a person from that class of a person, and that person's name is Luke Skywalker, and he's 53 years old. If you can understand that that's what's happening there, you can probably also understand that that's what's happening here, which is in JavaScript, right? So you may think I know Ruby, and I only know Ruby. But no, you have a superpower. You know concepts. You know classes. You know instances. You know variables. You know arrays and hashes. That, I told you I talk too much. That is powerful. Very, very powerful. So if you can explain it in Ruby, you can explain it in JavaScript. And then you can also explain it in Python. And you could probably explain it in C#. And maybe even TypeScript, if you wanted to. So that is an incredible power, and that is shifting the discourse away from thinking about that stress of where do I focus, which language? Do I do the tried and true language or the hot new language? Which framework should I look at? You know, this one or that one or this one or that one. Think more about the ideas. Because those languages, actually, once you get the concepts, those languages really start to roll. It may be hard to see that, and like you may be thinking to yourself, what is Ben talking about? Like that sounds wild, but it actually starts happening when you start seeing the concepts. I remember one of my jobs, I was on a multi-language team, and I was asked to review code, in C#. It was actually C#, and I never, ever looked at C# before. So I turned to my colleague who was the C# person, and I said, do you have like 30 minutes to help me set up the dev environment for this code? And he helped me, we paired on it, because I'd never seen C# in my life. And then I was tasked to review his code. And I did it, because C#, the ideas of programming apply in C# just as they do in other languages. That's an incredible power. So to recap, from the perspective of the individual contributor, your resume is not a liability. What you did, focus more on that than what you were called. Be humble, but don't be a doormat. Really, really important. And the application of concepts over the mastery or the feeling the need initially to master a specific language or a specific framework. Now let's spend a little bit of time talking about the manager, because the manager is also a very powerful member of this equation, an incredibly important member of this equation. So the manager, I think to begin that conversation, we need to frame it. We need to frame it from an orientation of how we approach management in general. And I think managers that approach management from this perspective are the managers that will be the best for managing folks who come from non-traditional backgrounds, which is management that understands this wisdom from Nelson Mandela, that to lead from behind and to put others in front is the victory for you. That when you put the people who report to you in front, when you celebrate them, and that's your celebration, that's your victory, that's actual management. That's leadership. That is what we're talking about. There's other management philosophies, definitely other management philosophies. But I believe this idea, which we can roughly call servant leadership, is the one that we want to focus on. which is you are lifting others up. And by lifting the people around you, the people who report to you, the people who are on your team, the people who you hire, when you lift them up, you know what you're doing? If you're a manager in this room or watching on the live stream, what you're doing, you're actually lifting yourself up. You know, if you worry about your report, you worry about how you justify yourself to the people you report to, this is how you do it. This is how you make success for yourself, by lifting everyone else up around you. And that is especially true when it comes to managing people from non-traditional backgrounds, like second career developers who are older. And what has to kind of be massaged, be navigated, be contoured is ego. I happen to think, and this is my perspective, ego is not a bad word. It's not a bad word. I think we often too much live in a society where we put ego and say, oh, ego, it's the worst thing in the world. Don't be egotistical. No, ego is a sense of pride of self, right? That you, just like what we talked about before, that you matter. But also, ego has to be in conversation with other values. Ego has to be in a play with other things. I'm a big believer in this idea of a dialectical tension, that things live in the tension between the two poles. So on ego on one hand, and the other understanding that people around you have other experiences, that people around you have a lot to bring, and that when you create a team that is diverse, and right now we're talking about diversity from backgrounds of second careers, right? But that diversity equally applies to race, to gender, to ethnicity, to orientation, to religion or no religion. It applies to physical abilities and cognitive abilities. It applies across the entire spectrum. And I know I'm like preaching a little bit, but I really, really believe that when you build a team like that, you're not just doing it because you want to be a good person and you want to be altruistic and you want to do the right thing. You're doing it because it's better for the company and the organization to do it, because you will build better products by doing it. You will build better tooling by doing it. You will build things that your customers or your users or other developers will look at and say, what were they thinking if you don't do that? Like, how could you have built that? Because if you only have a team of people who went to MIT and did CS at MIT, no offense to people who did CS at MIT, it's a wonderful place. But if you only have a team of people like that, you have major spots where you're not aware of things around you. This is for your benefit as a hiring manager to actually build diversity around your team, including second career developers. Which leads us to ask what your pipeline looks like, right? This is a very fundamental point. All too often, there's two kind of pipelines in hiring in tech. Let's look at them briefly. One pipeline starts with the following question. Hey, did you start coding when you were 8 years old? You did? Wow, let's just skip everything. You got a job. Welcome to the team. That's awesome. My 7-year-old coder who's now, 25. That's brilliant. You're now the lead architect. Congratulations. What's the other pipeline? Did you go to college? Oh yeah, you went to a 4-year school. That's fantastic. Did you graduate with a computer science degree? Oh, you did. That's so great. And do you like living and sleeping in the office? Oh, you love living and sleeping in the office? Great, because we have a ping pong table, we have futons to lay down in, we give you breakfast, lunch, dinner, and a midnight snack. That is fantastic. Then great, you got a job here. Awesome, welcome to the team. Friends, that pipeline is entirely, incredibly, fundamentally broken. Entirely broken. It's from another era. It might be from an era that actually never existed. It just needs to be thrown into the trash immediately, right? But we, all of us, but primarily hiring managers, can help fix it. And they can help fix it by asking every time they open a role, every time they think about whether it's a backfill or a new role, what doors am I opening? What doors am I looking through when I'm looking for candidates? And this is a conversation with managers and it's a conversation with recruiters. The doors I open for recruiting are ellipses. And if those doors are not inclusive enough, you have a problem. That's the question that every meeting about recruiting should start with. Where are we looking? Because if you don't look in those right doors, if you don't open those doors, guess what? No one's gonna walk through a closed door. You have to open the door. It's a bilateral relationship. It takes the door being open for somebody to actually walk in. Now, you could maybe, as a potential employee, you could slam down the door. You could break through the door, but it shouldn't depend on your audaciousness to land that first job. You shouldn't have to be with a lot of chutzpah, a lot of audacity to get that first job. You should be able to get the job because the door is open, like anyone else. So to recap from the perspective of the manager, servant leadership, it's all about lifting up others. A diverse team is not only just a good thing to do, it's a better team. It's gonna make your work better. Ego can be obstructing. Ego needs to be kept in tension with the other values. And you must, absolutely must, broaden your hiring pipeline. Because by doing so, by opening those doors, you create the potential for people to walk in that you may never have even realized were gonna walk in to begin with. Another part of the ethical tradition that I find very meaningful to me, because this seems often like a lot in life can seem like a lot, that it's not your duty to finish the job, because there's a lot here to do. There's tons to do. Insurmountable it sometimes can feel like, right? It's not your duty to finish, but it's your duty every single day to be engaged in this journey, to be engaged in this process, to make it better. And if you are a second career developer and you have made it through that door, if you're now a career level developer, you've had a couple years of experience, it's now incumbent upon you to be that voice in those teams. Because where there is not that voice, you have to be that voice. And make sure the path is not so less trodden anymore. Make sure the path might have some stepping stones on it. Make sure the path, clear the dust out a little bit for those coming behind you. Because those people are coming behind you every 10 minutes. It's not just a small trickle, it's a floodgate. Thank you very much. We have 2 minutes and 32 seconds for questions. If there are any. If there's not, I love you all. Yes.
How would you say your experience as a rabbi has influenced kind of your move to development, and what skills would you say that you've brought over? What would you emphasize?
Yeah, that's a very good question. If you didn't hear the question, Rachel asked, how has my background as a rabbi contributed to my skills as a developer or my entering the field of development? It's hard to answer that on one foot. I'd probably say the biggest area is that I have an incredible, sometimes annoying focus on the human aspect. Always trying to think about the person, whether they're in front of me or not in front of me. And so bringing that, what we often term in this industry, soft skills to the conversation, thinking about the empathy of what this is doing and how are we driving it and how are we encouraging and cultivating a more inclusive environment. I think that's a perspective I'm constantly bringing, that humanistic element into tech, that combination, that confluence. Yes. The person with the cool glasses.
Thank you. Given age bias, and this is a workshop for people who are entering in their 30s, how important is it to try to attempt to go on some sort of team lead or people leader or management track, with the idea being that there are going to be younger people coming in? Should one in their 30s try to go to an individual contributor track, just trying to continue to code, or should one sort of try to aim into a track that might be a little bit more, perhaps some might say, age appropriate?
I really love that you brought that question up. I intimated around that question, and I want to make it very explicit that age should not be a determinant for what you want to do in your life as a career, and that if you want to be the one who's contributing code and not the one who's people supervising and growing people, you should be able to do that no matter if you're 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, or 80. And I think that management, it's incumbent upon them to make the space inclusive to have that happen. And that's what was part of my aim in this conversation, was to think about how we can do that from both ends. If you want to manage people, and you want to help lift up other people, that's fantastic. But oftentimes you go in this career because you want to do that. You want to get into the code. And it shouldn't matter if you're 30, 40, or 50. And I would actually argue vociferously against the idea that there's any age-appropriate role or age-inappropriate role. All roles are age-appropriate. All roles are open to anyone from any backgrounds. And we have to make the companies and the organizations conducive to making that reality just actualize. Because that is the reality. The other is the fiction. This is the reality. So we just have to bring the fiction into nonfiction and make it actually happen. Thank you for asking that question. It's a really good one. Okay, we're up. It's time. Thank you very much.